Just let me know if you got on by hitting, just by checking in the comment section. Well, say hello in the chat if you're here, Miss Burke. If you're logged on, just say hello in the chat below so that I know you're there. I want to welcome you to another day of class. Uh, and I'm only going to say this out loud because I only think one person's on here, but um, Ms. Burke, Ms. Blanco, if you have any questions or somebody didn't get something or whatever, you can call me. I do have an earpiece in, um, and I can clarify or I can discuss whatever you need me to do. Um, so hopefully you guys are hearing me. Also, you see my mouth moving, but you can't hear me. Interesting. Okay. Can you hear me now? I think you can hear me now. I got a feeling you can. If you can hear me, go ahead and just say hello in the bottom of the chat. This was working before. Can you hear me? So I'm assuming you can hear me now. I believe I fixed the mic. Are we good?
This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about China, which these days is discussed almost constantly on television and in newspapers. Wait, are they still a thing? So we used to print information on thinly sliced trees, and then you would pay someone to take these thinly sliced trees and throw them onto your front lawn, and that's how we received information? No one thought this was weird, by the way.
I'll hit play.
Right, but anyway, you hear a lot about how China's going to overtake the US and bury us under a pile of inexpensive electronics, but I don't want to address those fears today. Instead, I want to talk about how the way you tell a story shapes the story. China was really the first modern state, by which I mean it had a centralized government and a core of bureaucrats who could execute the wishes of that government, and it lasted in pretty much the same form from 150 BCE until 1911 CE,
I think there's a
which is
delay.
technically known as a long-ass time. The Chinese were also among the first people to write history. In fact, one of the Confucian classics is called the Shu Jing, or Classic of History. This is great for us because, which these days is this.
We figured it out now. There is the delay. I see you, Miss Burke. So you can't hear me again? What is going on? Oh, Great. Okay. Okay, Brenda and Jennifer. All right. Well, uh, as we're learning how to get this thing to work, um, obviously things aren't going to be perfect here in the beginning. Um, but I have came across some things, some resources that's going to help you out. And so this video here, which can be found on the website, is another tool which I can actually pause and we can discuss some of the important things about the video. So I don't want to be on here too long, uh, but Ms. Burke, if you still can't hear me, um, it might be on your end because I can hear myself, and I see Miss Blanco is saying she can hear me. Uh, if there's no one else who can hear me, just well, I guess you can't let me know, but um, I'm gonna just go ahead and go with it for right now. I believe you when you log in, you are behind, so it's not necessarily live. You kind of have to speed up because from what I'm hearing right now is I'm actually behind because I can hear the piece to see where you're at. All right. So um, I understand some of you guys who just logged in. I understand why there's a delay for some of you all. So right now you'll hear this a little late, but there is a red button here, not for the video I'm doing, but for you. It's a red line. You need to fast forward it so that you can get current with me. All right, well, we're gonna get started. We got Miss Blanco, Miss Burke, Danabelle, Jennifer. I feel like I'm missing someone. Five, there was six. All right. So let's let's do this. Let's talk about China, okay? And if we go to China, if we look at our question, our inquiry art question, okay? Uh, we've already talked about. Let me move this out the way here real quick. Uh, we've already talked about the beliefs of um, and the behaviors of Taoism, Confucianism, and legalism. Okay. We will review that, but I want to move on. We'll come back to this. What I want to do now is look at these three questions here. Mandate of Heaven. What were the achievements of the Shang and the Zhou dynasties? And how did the Han change the way Chinese empires worked? Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to remember uh, our inquiry arc. How should a government treat its people? Okay. So when we discuss how does a government treat its people, we're looking at the mandate of heaven. Okay. Um, and the Shang and Zhou dynasties, along with the Han dynasties. So, how did these governments treat their people, and why did they treat their people in this specific manner? Okay, so what we're going to do here is um, we're going to come back to China. Okay, and we're going to play. And all I want us to do today, just to keep it real simple, uh, is we're just going to write a couple notes down about the dynasties we've just talked about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause and I'm just going to say, hey, this is about the Han Dynasty. Write a key point down of what they did and what made them important. Okay. Also, let's also keep in mind that we have our book. Okay. And our book will take us exactly to where um, we need to go to find out more information on these different dynasties. So if you go down here to um, review of life in the Chinese dynasty, review of ancient Chinese economy, then we have something in the book that is going to help us find the information a lot more successfully. So we don't have to do a lot of work. Okay, we'll just go here. We'll go to the book. We'll go to explore. All right, and then we're at one. Okay, one, we have the Zoo Dynasty. Okay, uh, and then the first thing we have right here is the mandate of heaven. So remember, this is in your book. The mandate of heaven is an idea held in China since the Zhou dynasty, which lasted from 1046 to 256 BCE. We don't have to write that down. That's just letting us know how long it's been around. But according to this way of thinking, the Zhou had been given the right to rule by heaven. So what we first want to do is, if we're in our book, we highlight. Okay. Uh, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. All right, so we highlight. Okay, we would want to make this yellow if this decides to come back up. We'll come back. All of the dynasties following the Zhou adopted this concept, which was also supported by the philosopher and teacher Confucius. Okay, so when we talked about, we'll just go all the way to Confucius right here. So we'll highlight, we'll make it yellow just to be simple, because we learned about Confucius, right? We talked about the different hierarchies of Confucius with family. So remember, everything with family deals with Confucius. Uh, so the mandate differs slightly from the divine right of kings that would appear later in Europe. So instead of saying later in Europe, what we can do is discuss the other civilizations, because divine right dealt with the past civilizations that we talked about, as far as Egypt. So a great note would be here, you will want to put Egypt. Okay, so Egypt, ancient Egypt, would be a great example. Um, who else do we have? We also have ancient Israel. Okay, as examples. Okay, the Chinese believe people of the mandate was granted because of virtue or moral and ethical behavior of the ruler, not because of his hereditary. So hereditary is saying blood. Okay, so um, you have earned the right to be a king or a queen because your parents was a king or a queen. Okay, so that's what heredity means. You were birthed for that right. So uh, here, the Chinese people believe that the mandate was granted because of virtue or moral and ethical behavior. So basically, your actions. You had to be a good ruler in order to be granted the right to rule China. If you were not, you would lose that, okay, because you did not behave correctly. You didn't treat the people right. So again, when we go back to, when we go back to this question here, what was the mandate of heaven? Okay, it's basically this right here. Okay, we have the Chinese people believe the mandate was granted because of the virtue or moral and ethical behavior of the ruler, not because of his hereditary. Okay, um, so moving on, we next have, as a result, the right to rule did not have to remain in one's family. So this is an example here. So we'll make that pink. Okay, uh, technically it could be why it's important as well. Okay, but if we follow it back, it says the ancient Chinese believed dynasties would lose the mandate of heaven if rulers did not behave virtuously. So then we can make this green here. Okay, so we have real quick mandate of heaven. If the Chinese ruler ruled correctly, treated the people right, um, then they had the right to lead. If they did not only did the ruler no longer have the right to lead and lose the right to lead, but their family could as well. Okay, and then because of that, these Chinese rulers would actually do what they're supposed to, because anything that showed that it wasn't virtuous, they had the right to lose it. All right. Um, if you understand that, just let me know. Uh, let me know down below if you're with me. I see some Spanish, so I'll slow it up. I see a bunch of Spanish right now, so we've got some learning going on. I just can't read it. I'm reading and not really sure. So yeah, I did originally decide to go with the video, but I noticed that the book was going to be a lot quicker, a little bit more effective for the mandate of heaven. If we scroll down just a little bit more, this is an example of the mandate of heaven. So if you ever see this quote here, to rule a country of 1,000 chariots, there must be reverent action to business and sincerity, economy and expenditure, and love for men, and employment of the people at the proper seasons. Okay, that is a quote from Confucius, and it's discussing the mandate of heaven, also making sure that the government is doing their role. All right, give me, who's that, Giselle? So you guys don't understand? So let me do this for you real quick. Let's go. Let's go language. Do you understand? Do you understand? What you want to do is, this is the, and I think I'm doing this right. This is the answer. The example. Why it's important. Are you with me on that? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll look at the video here. So let's go to the video, because the video has the mandate of heaven in here. Okay, so I see some of you guys are still struggling with the mandate of heaven. So what we'll do is we'll look at the video here and see if that helps you out.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're newspapers and bury us under a pile of story shaped bureaucrats who could CE until 1911 CE. History. In fact, one of the Confucian classics is called The Show Were Happening, but it's also problematic. This doesn't seem very fair. From a continuous ruling family. As long as that family produces emperors, and they are always dudes. No, they aren't. First off, there were several empress dowagers who wielded tremendous power throughout Chinese history, and there was one very important full-fledged empress, Empress Wu, who ruled China for more than 20 years and founded her own freaking dynasty. And those emperors keep ruling, the dynasty gets to be a dynasty. So the dynasty can end for two reasons. Either they run out of dudes, which never happened thanks to the hard work of many, many concubines, or the emperor is overthrown after a rebellion or a war. This is more or less what happened to all the dynasties, which makes it easy for me to go over to camera 2 and describe them in a single run-on sentence. Hi there, camera 2. Leaving aside the Xia dynasty, which was sadly fictional, the first Chinese dynasty was the Shades period, when the Qin emperor was by the Han, which was the dynasty, into political chaos, which only means there was Shang, who in turn was still not enough to prevent the Mongols. Built the Great Wall and made amazing. It was the last dynasty because it had lasted for a interesting as far as capital H history is concerned. Instead, it happened, which leads us to the Mandate of Heaven. So the concept of the Mandate of Heaven dates from the Zhou Dynasty, and current historians think that they invented it to get rid of the Shang. Before the Zhou, China didn't even have a concept of heaven or Tian, but they did have a high god called Shengdi. But the Zhou believed in Tian, and they were eager to portray the idea of heaven as eternal, so they ascribed the concept of the Mandate of Heaven back to a time even before the Shang, explaining that the Shang were able to conquer the Xia only because the Xia kings had lost the Mandate of Heaven. This, of course, would have been impossible, partly because the Xia kings had no concept of heaven, and partly because, as previously noted, they didn't exist, but let's just leave that aside. The Shujing is pretty specific about what caused the Xia kings to lose the mandate, by the way, explaining the attack on Xia may be traced to the orgies in Mingtao. Sadly, the Shujing is woefully short on details of these orgies, but orgies are the kind of behavior that is not expected of a ruler, and therefore heaven saw fit to come in, remove the mandate, and allow the Shang to take power. But then the Shang lost the mandate. Why? Well, the last Shang emperor is reported to have roasted and eaten his opponents, which, you know, bit of a deal breaker as far as the Mandate of Heaven is concerned. Of course, that might not actually have happened, but it would explain why heaven would allow the Zhou to come to power. So basically, the fact that one dynasty falls and is replaced by another in a cycle that lasts for 3,000 years is explained in the eyes of early Chinese historians by divine intervention based on whether the ruler behaves in a proper, upright manner. It's after the intervention based on whether the ruler behaves in a proper, upright manner.
So the ruler behaves in a proper, upright manner. If the ruler does not behave in a proper, upright manner, they lose the mandate of heaven. And the mandate of heaven is the ability to lead China. Does that make sense? I'll play it one more time.
It's after the fact analysis based on whether the ruler explained in the eyes of early Chinese historians by divine intervention based on whether the ruler behaves in a proper, upright manner. It's after the fact analysis that has the virtue of being completely impossible to disprove, as well as offering a tidy explanation for some very messy political history. And even more importantly, it reinforces a vision of moral behavior that is a cornerstone of Confucianism, which I will get to momentarily. But first, let's see an example of the Mandate of Heaven in action. So the Qin Dynasty only lasted 38 years, but it's one of the most important dynasties in Chinese history. So important, in fact, that it gave the place its name, Qin. Can I just tell you guys that we literally just spent 20 minutes on that shot? We shot it like 40 times. Stan, you are in love with puns. The accomplishment of the Qin was to reunify China under a single emperor for the first time in 500 years, ending the Warring States period. As you can imagine, the making of that particular omelet required the cracking of quite a few eggs, and the great Qin Emperor Qin Shuangdi and his descendants developed a reputation for brutality that was justified. But it was also exaggerated for effect so that the successor dynasty, the Han, would look more legitimate in the eyes of heaven. So when recounting the fall of the Qin, historians focused on how a bunch of murderous eunuchs turned the Qin emperors into puppets, not literal puppets, although that would have been awesome. And these crazy eunuchs like tricked emperors into committing suicide when they started thinking for themselves, etc. So the Mandate of Heaven turned away from these suicidal puppet emperors, which set up a nice contrast with the early Han emperors, such as Wen, who came to power in 180 BCE and ruled benevolently, avoiding extravagance in personal behavior and ruling largely according to Confucian principles. Under Wen, there were no more harsh punishments for criticizing the government, executions declined, and most importantly for the Confucian scholars who were writing the history, the government stopped burning books. Thus, according to the ancient Chinese version of history, Emperor Wen, by behaving as a wise Confucian, maintains the Mandate of Heaven. So who is this Confucius I won't shut up about? As a wise Confucius. Thus, according to the ancient Chinese version of history, Emperor Wen, by behaving as a benevolently, avoiding extravagance in personal power in emperors, which started thinking for them would have been awesome. And these crazy eunuchs like tricked emperors into committing suicide when they started thinking for themselves, etc. So the Mandate of Heaven turned away from these suicidal puppet emperors, which set up a nice contrast with the early Han emperors, such such as Wen, who came to power in 180 BCE and ruled benevolently, avoiding
So Han is actually the better ruler. Okay. The ruler before Han is a bad ruler. So if Han is a better ruler than the previous one, he's going to have the right to control China, and the ruler before him
extravagance in personal behavior
will lose that right. Okay. Remember, it's about your actions. Let me see here. If you're a good ruler, then you have the right to lead. And what I'm going to do here is, we had a video, because you guys actually know this, you just haven't connected it yet. So what I'm going to do here is remind you the divine right of kings. Okay. Divine right of kings, which we talked about before. Is the mandate of heaven. So the divine right of kings and the mandate of heaven are the exact same, different.
It's known as the divine right of kings,
different,
and it's been around for a very long time. It's the concept that kings have used to claim their sovereignty directly from God.
I'm sorry. Divine right of kings, mandate of heaven is the exact same thing, except for the fact that for the mandate of heaven, the kings can lose their power. Okay. So let's take a look at this quick 3-minute.
God, and that they are subject to no earthly authority. This idea can be traced back to ancient Aryan and Egyptian times, and has been used by many a monarch. Some even trace their ancestries back to the gods of their time to help strengthen their claim on this divine right. But the idea is also present in the Bible, Romans chapter 13 to be exact. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. The prophet Daniel also supported the theory in his book, writing, God removes kings and sets them up.
So right here, God removes kings and sets them up. That's an example of mandate of heaven. Even though we're talking about the divine right of kings, this is an example right here. God removes kings and sets up kings. So you can write that down for an example. God removes kings and sets up kings, meaning places them in power. Okay, so a king isn't going to be a king unless God wants them to be a king.
Pretty serious stuff. The writings of Paul and Daniel have been used to support the idea that God is over man and the king is over man on behalf of God. It's kind of the same God has established. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against.
Let's do this.
what God has instituted. The prophet Daniel also supported the theory in his book, writing, God removes kings and sets them up.
All right, so we have in the Spanish right
in his
here.
book, writing, God removes kings and.
So this is the great point right here, which I think I'm gonna pause right here. God removes kings and sets them up. See if that works. So God removes kings and sets up kings. So this is the example we'll stick with right here. So kings can lose power and people can become kings. How do we do that? Let me see something. I think I might have something. Give me a second. All right, so I have something here. I think I'll bring it in for next class. Uh, Here's the one thing that I want you to understand. When we're talking about the mandate of heaven, people lose power. Okay, so we're talking the loss of power, which we haven't talked about before with kings. Okay, so they drop from the totem pole. Okay, so when we're talking about social class, if you're not a king, you can't be at the top. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So if we look at, I'm gonna try here real quick. All right. If we look at, oh, we look at the hierarchy right here. Okay. The king is at the top. All right. King is at the top, but they lose power. So this king now drops down here. All right. And then someone else takes the power as being king. So that's the mandate of heaven. It's a circle. One king or emperor to another king or emperor to another king or emperor to another king or emperor. Okay. So, yeah, you guys can see that. So if you look at that circle there, that's the mandate of heaven. So it's just kings coming in and kings coming out. And they don't have to be of the same blood. Okay. So I do have some readings and stuff for you to help you out on that. Thank you for bearing with me as we try to figure this out. But as we get further along in this distance learning, things will be done a lot easier, a lot simpler on both parts, so that will be okay that you get it. So if you do me a favor, Um, Under the comments, in your own words, let me know what the mandate of heaven is and how it affects. Actually, I'm gonna just write it down for you. Let me go ahead and just put this in here. All right, and I want you to answer this question. All right, so explain the mandate of heaven. And how a good ruler would treat his his uh his followers. So how would a king treat his followers if he was following the mandate of heaven? And what I'll do is I'll go back to here. And when we show back up tomorrow, uh, when you say you don't understand, and it just hit me, it should have hit me earlier, but when you don't understand, explain what you don't understand. So if you don't get, and you can actually write that down now too. So I see some of you all talking about how you don't understand. What about the mandate of heaven do you not understand? So that tomorrow I can close that gap. So don't just say I don't understand the mandate of heaven. Um, Tell me what about the mandate of heaven you don't understand. Um, so, number one, rulers are supposed to treat their followers correctly. Okay. Number two, if they do not treat their followers correctly, they lose they lose God's acceptance to allow them to lead. So they lose their right to lead if they don't treat the people correctly. Okay. So those are just two quick points about what a ruler should do when it comes to following the mandate of heaven. All right. So if you don't understand the mandate of heaven, um, discuss in the chat below what you did not understand. And if you have questions, see if you can do it in English, or Miss Blanco, could you um, translate? Because I see questions or whatever, but I don't understand them. I can't read Spanish. Ms. Blanco, which link? Which link? So today, um, I'm not going to give any homework other than the vocabulary. Study vocabulary. I do have some work that I still have to put together. Um, it's a packet form, but obviously you all can't turn that in to me in person. So I just have to set up a little system to where you guys can type the information in and submit. So once I get that up and going, you'll be ready to go. All right. So obviously class is, oh, I see. What vocabulary? China. China. You should still be looking at your China vocabulary. I see somebody asked about that, so I'll go there real quick. Okay. Um, remember, vocabulary is going to be pretty big. So we go to seventh grade. Oh, I see Osley's right there. Let me accept that. All right. We have ancient China here. Okay, so work on that vocabulary. And what I'll be doing is I'll be coming back with more organized information for you to follow and complete your work outside of the stream, and we'll go from there. So before, no, we can't do that yet. Remind later. All right. So I can't read anything you guys wrote about the mandate of heaven. So I guess I'll talk with Miss Blanco about that. All right. So I guess we'll go. I guess we'll talk to you later. All right. Uh, guess that's it. Any questions before I go? Any questions? No questions? What just happened here? All right. For whatever reason, I can't see you guys' can't see you guys' posts, your threads anymore. All right, well, I'll see you all later. I can't read anything. I just lost it. Uh, and that's a wrap. Thanks for being part of the first streaming lesson I have ever done. Have a good one.